Hello, welcome to this episode of Let's Talk Death. I'm Fran Solomon.
And I'm Andy McNeil.
And we're thrilled to be your hosts for these conversations. Let's Talk Death is brought to you by Heal Grief, a social support network creating community after someone has died. Everything we do is inspired by our core belief that no one should ever grieve alone.
Our goal with this program is to have a friendly chat with some amazing people so we can help normalize and educate our Heal Grief community. Our guest today is Kimberly Carter Gamble. Kimberly is the producer, director, and writer of the globally acclaimed documentary, Thrive, What on Earth Will It Take? And the sequel, Thrive 2, This Is What It Takes, which will be released this year. In the course of her research for the films, Kimberly traveled the world to investigate and empower breakthrough innovations in health, energy, and consciousness. It led her to explore insights and technologies that shed new light on the energetic nature of reality and what it all means in terms of death. She witnessed profound healing practices, many of which have helped to infuse her personal life with tools and insights to navigate grief and other strong emotions. Kimberly, we are delighted to have you as a guest on our show.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having such an important show, and thank you for including me.
Of course. So, Kimberly, we're excited to learn about these insights and the tools and techniques you used in your own healing. But first, may I ask you to share with our audience your personal grief experience?
Yeah, sure. It's well, I think the real trajectory for me with grieving is that I think, like most Westerners at least, I had an association with grief that the most appropriate response was to kind of buckle up and bear it, and the notion of being strong. And so even though I lost important people to me as a child, my aunt, a dear friend of mine, I hadn't really developed a healthy relationship with grief, or really an understanding of what was happening to me in those processes. And then my father died. I was super close to my dad, and he died when I was pregnant with my first child. I was 26, and I remember feeling so much grief that I was afraid that if I felt it, I would never stop. I specifically remember just feeling like this. I so wanted him to see and be with me for this experience. I so didn't want him to die. And so I had a friend at that time, and she said, "Boy, you are just moving fast and not really letting this in." And I said to her, I have so much to do. I already had 4 adopted children at the time, and I was so busy and working and all the rest. I said, I don't know what would happen to my life if I allowed this in. I think I would just completely fall apart. And she said, it's really not my experience that it works that way. She said, so I'll tell you what, I'll handle everything. I'll take care of the kids. I'll show up for you in any way. And she was a super competent gal. She actually could show up for me. And she said, and I'll stay as long as it takes. And if it turns out that you never get through this, then I'll stay forever. But I'll bet you that actually you'll get through this to something else on the other side. And I trusted her enough and believed that the beacon of something that she was holding out was real enough, I guess, that I just let it happen. And oh my God, all the grief that had accumulated in my life and then sort of culminated in that time with my dad. I cried and cried. I yelled. I just made a mess. I was a mess. And I allowed myself to be a mess. And in that flow, which is really what happened, like there had just been this clogged up emotional body that somehow, through the trust that she engendered and the experience that she offered me. I still, every year, I write to her and thank her. Like, that was a long time ago, but I'll forever be grateful to her, because I did get through the experience. And as much as I have continued to miss my dad, I found that it was actually breathing into it and feeling it and allowing that level of falling apart that enabled me to sort of come back together in a way that was so much more solid and so much more true than sort of bucking up and handling it ever would have done. So that was really my first sort of conscious experience with grief. And then later, what happened is that, so I had the gift of having adopted stepchildren as well as birth children in my life. And my oldest adopted stepdaughter, who I had the honor of raising and loving for a long time, in her 40s, she got a virulent case of cancer, and she died a really horribly gruesome death. And again, I knew by now that my job wasn't to somehow keep that grief at bay. And yet I was, the process of allowing myself the level of grief that I felt, even though I had by then an understanding that I believe that our souls are eternal and that we're part of an energetic reality, and that passing from this human life, I believe there's consciousness after. I had all that understanding, and yet emotionally it didn't touch it. The poignancy of my grief was so real, and the fact that it was little things like that. I couldn't touch her feet. Like, I would rub her feet, and that I couldn't touch her feet, and knowing somehow that she was okay, or believing that, didn't take away the need for me to really, again, fall apart and allow myself to be changed, to be forever changed by the human poignancy of my attachment to her and my longing for her. And so in terms of the tools and experiences, in my travels, and especially with science, I really did get exposed to a lot about the energetic nature of reality. And I noticed that whether it was new energy technologies or health healing technologies or shaman in the deep jungles of Colombia, they were talking about finding ways to resonate with this field of infinite possibilities as a way to access the peace and potential of it. And in that, I got exposed to plant medicine. And I had an ayahuasca journey where I saw my stepdaughter, Kimmy, it's her name, and she was so fine. She just looked so much like her healthy self. And it had been hard for me to remember her healthy because it was such a long and painful demise. And there she was, just gorgeous and healthy. And I said to her on this journey, I said, "Oh, wow, it's so good to see you looking so beautiful and healthy." And she looked kind of surprised, like, "What are you talking about?" And I said it had been so hard. And she was like, "Oh, that." It was just, oh yeah, that lifetime or whatever it was. She was so fine that I realized, thank goodness I had allowed myself to feel it and allowed there to be some coming together of my understanding and my emotion. At last, it happened. For a while, my understanding didn't really touch my emotion, but somewhere through that process, I was gifted with the reconciliation. And doesn't mean I don't still feel deep sadness or be overcome still sometimes with like,
Sure.
whoa, I did not want that to happen, you know.
Yeah,
Well, grief. Well, you think about grief itself is an energy, right? And it's, you know, the relationship that you had here physically, you know, with your stepdaughter. Those are things that are ingrained into our very being, right? And so
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
in transition, there is that. Energy is a great way to describe it. Grief is an energy all itself. You know, that years ago, people kind of followed sort of a Freudian thought, you know, that you make connections and you have to find ways to cut those strings and move on, and kind of a stiff upper lip sort of a thing. But more and more we've discovered it's the opposite. It's that something real is happening when a person transitions out of our lives in one way. That something real's happening within us, and we can't ignore that. You know, somehow that's something we have to be present with.
Absolutely. It's like a wave, you know, you're fighting the wave, you're just going to get bashed around. And you know, one thing about what's happening right now in a COVID reality on the planet is that I have a strong feeling that what's really going down is this massive global grieving process. And that there's just very little, like your conversation is so important. I am sincerely grateful that to have an opportunity and a forum for talking about death and dying and grief, because a huge dying process is going on. The world we knew died, right? There will never be the world as we knew it. And there's huge unknown. And I know for me, what happened was I decided when it was first coming down, there was so much information and so much fear and so much energy, right? That I just thought, I'm going to assume I'm going to die from this and just go at it. Let's talk about it. I'm afraid. Okay, how do I deal with this, right? How do I deal with actually confronting my own death through this process where I had the first 2 weeks, I was really in it. Just let me deal with this. And then if I'm not dead at the end of it and I come out, we'll continue the conversation, but it won't be because I pretended like the threat of death didn't just rise up big time in all of our lives. And it was really helpful actually to just name it.
And yes, through these times, I think us as bereavement care professionals are more concerned than ever over the increased mental health issues, depression, poor coping skills, those that are really going to be suffering loss of jobs and relationships, how they're going to cope, and the increase of potential suicide, which already is a pandemic that isn't addressed.
Yeah.
And those they're leaving behind.
Yeah.
The magnitude of so many more people that will be grieving. And as we've just talked about, as you've so eloquently shared, grief is a wave. There is no end to grief. It's a lifelong journey that we carry with us. Whether it's a trigger of a sound, a smell, a phrase, or whatever it is, it evokes even 20, 30 years later an emotion of grief. Doesn't mean we're grieving every moment.
Right.
But it does mean that it is a journey that we carry with us through our lives. And your experience that you had with plant-based medicine was really, I can't imagine being anything but so comforting and reassuring that energy does continue.
Right. For me, just the whole understanding of the energetic nature of reality has helped me to understand the futility and really destructiveness of resistance to letting energy move. And emotions, like I've just never seen anything in nature that's unnecessary. So if we're given these profound experiences of emotion, it's for something. And so what is it? And what can we do to become more fluent in the language of emotion? And I think, honestly, I really think just talking about it and naming, I remember we were doing a lot of public things while I was in a grieving process, and I had to really limit my engagement because for a while I felt like if I opened my mouth, tears would come out. I just needed to cry. And I said to my husband, I said, I'll be back. Someday I'll be back. But right now, I can't be related to as if I was the same old me, because I'm not. And even to say I'm back, like a new me will be back. A new me that's more fluent with this process, because it's like riding Maverick's wave or something, that just to be present with that is so important. And I feel like that's really true now. And I'm so grateful for the people who can deal with what's happening now on the planet for people, and naming the grief, because there's the fear of the virus, but there's also the very real loss of all kinds of things, whether it is a loved one or whether it's, like you say, jobs, or the increase in domestic violence, the isolation. I'm really concerned about that. I think the cost of isolation is huge. And I like how you say that no one should ever have to grieve alone. I think there need to be grief hotlines here for people to be calling and being able to just admit and acknowledge what they're going through, because that will move it. That's where people get their strength, is by acknowledging it and finding out, wow, we survive it. We survive these things. It's like childbirth or something, you have to let go into it and then you come out of it.
Yeah.
I was talking with a friend last night, actually. We were doing a little video conversation, catching up. And he asked, how you doing? And the way I worded it was, well, I'm starting to feel like I'm getting a groove. Like I felt like my life had a groove to it. Right? I was used to certain things. We had Tuesday nights, we went to this place, and Fridays we went here, and we had these friends that we usually spent Saturdays with. Life had this rhythm, and this is just thrown the rhythm off. And I'm just starting to feel like I'm getting a little bit of a rhythm to it. And that's the only way I could describe it to him was, I feel like that changed, and now I'm just trying to find that groove.
New reality. New reality.
Yeah.
So was your research a quest for healing, or did you find healing through your research?
Good question.
Well, so I had an experience where, our movie Thrive explored the sort of energetic nature of reality, and also the consolidation of power, and how there appeared to be healing technologies that worked with energy and resonance that had profound impact that we weren't getting to know about because of sort of the pharmaceutical stranglehold on medicine and healing. So we heard from over 1,000 different inventors and innovators, and from every sector, from all over the world after the movie came out. And we just sort of noticed this pattern among some of them. And in the healing, there was a doctor in Mexico who claimed to have a cure for cancer. And it was so interesting, and it sounded quite credible. And so we decided to go check it out. And in the course of going to see him, so he's a male doctor healing a female patient. And the female, I was in the room both to verify that he said in real time he could have tumors disappear, and also because of a male-female dynamic, he needed another woman in the room. So I was in the room, and it turned out the woman had the exact same cancer as my stepdaughter. The tumor was in exactly the same place. And he said, go ahead and put your hand on the tumor, and you'll be able to feel it disappear. And I did that, and in fact, the tumor did disappear under my hand, and I actually passed out, and I felt probably every emotion imaginable in that moment. I felt grief, huge grief that I didn't know him sooner.
Sure.
I felt huge hope that other people wouldn't have to go through what we did. I felt like I had my hand on two sides of a reality. Like I knew the pain, I knew a solution here, and I felt huge responsibility in that moment. And I hit the ground. My husband was in the other room. He came in, and I knew in that moment my life changed. And what happened is I made a commitment that I would do everything I could to learn more about these technologies and help get them to the world. And that's essentially what my journey led me on. So I went around the world to gain a better understanding of these healing technologies that took me to Thailand and China and Russia and Egypt and Europe and Mexico and Costa Rica and all over the place, where I saw people working with this understanding and the healing that could come from it. And in that was exposed to consciousness tools as well, because I believe that our thoughts and our exercise and what we eat, it's all part of health. Is one constellation of experiences, and so consciousness is a huge part of it. So I traveled the world explicitly looking for healing technologies, and then how to get them out to people without breaking laws and getting in trouble. So that's what the sequel movie's about, that's coming out this year, and it's what my journey was all about.
Great.
Well, Kimberly, so with that in mind, we only have a few minutes left, and we want to give you an opportunity. A lot of times there are folks watching us, and they think, how can I connect with this guest? So how would people connect with you or with your work, or how might they do that if they are interested?
Well, thank you. So we will be launching Thrive 2, This Is What It Takes, which really takes us on a journey of finding these fabulous solutions all over the world. I don't have my landing page up yet, but I will. So if you sign up at thrivemovement.com, then you will be able to be notified when we launch Thrive 2, which will be later this year. So I appreciate that. And like I said, I so appreciate the work that you're doing, and anything that I can do to help bring this conversation forward so that people are comfortable being a mess for whatever amount of time it takes to actually feel and process the energy of grief. I can just say it takes a lot more courage to feel it than it does to repress it or try to hold it off. And I'm very grateful for anybody willing to muster that. And I promise that the reward is worth it.
Kimberly, we want to thank you so much for being a guest on our show here at Let's Talk Death, and for sharing your journey and the story behind your work.
Oh, thank you so much. Really appreciate you dearly.
Yeah, thank you, Kimberly. And thank you to those who are joining us for this episode of Let's Talk Death. If you would like to learn more about Heal Grief, please visit us at healgrief.org. At healgrief.org, you can learn more about all of the programs and resources of Heal Grief, including our national network of support for grieving young adults called Actively Moving Forward.
Make sure to sign up on healgrief.org to receive our newsletter for links to future episodes of Let's Talk Death.
And again, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Let's Talk Death.